Hi, I'm Dr. Bob Hogg, and in this video we'll be having a look at how we can get data into JASP, and then also, once we've got that data in, some very basic filtering processes that we can go through before we do any sort of analysis. So here is the interface that you see when you open JASP for the first time, and you can see that you have grade icons at the top, which indicates that in these particular cases you need data to actually carry out any sort of analysis. And to do that, we can either use the new data option here, or we can open a data file, which might be the more usual way of starting up JASP. So we'll have a look at this menu first. If you open up that menu, you can see that you have again the option for new data, but also the option to open up a data file, and you have several options within that, including recent files, which you can see here. You can go to your computer, and again you have recent files that you may have used, but you can also browse by using the button at the top, and this gives you obviously access to your computer and will generally look at your last directory where you managed to get data from. You can see that JASP has the ability to look at several different data file types, including JASP files, which actually include both data and the analysis, the standard text-based CSV format, and also simple text and tab separated variables as well, spreadsheet files, and also files that can be read from other commercial type programs such as SPSS, Starter and SAS. I've used the SPSS files in the past, and that does have advantages over the simple CSV files, as it brings in a lot of the label information as well as the basic information, so you might want to consider those options. Again, there are other options to load data in. If you have an Open Science Framework account, you can sign into that and get your files directly from your account there. You can also attach to a database if you have some sort of survey, for instance, that feeds into such a database directly. And you've also got lots of example files in the data library repository, and each of these are labeled to the type of analysis you might want to practice on. And by opening these up, you can see that there are lots of information on each of these particular files and how they might be used. And there are also books associated with JASP, which again come with their own data files as well. So there is lots of information on data files that can be used for teaching purposes, as well as analysing your own data. What we'll do now is have a look at how you can put your data in directly into JASP, and we'll click on the new data option. And you'll see that the format is very typical of these types of programs, with the columns being the variables and the rows being the cases, or you might want to look at those as people within your data set. Again, you have your first column here, which is just labeled simply column 1. To change that, you double click and you see lots of options to change this. The simple one is to first of all change the name of the variable, and I'm just going to change that to height. You can also put in a slightly longer name and also a description if you so wish. So for instance here we could put height in centimeters. Notice also that you have, as in a lot of other programs, the ability to change the type of variable that you're describing in terms of its measurement scale. It can either be scale, ordinal or nominal. Now it might be useful at this point to just have a brief overview as to the main differences between these three types of data. And so what I've got here is a simple table which outlines the main differences. What I've got in the left hand side is the more normal description of 4 different data types. Here we have the corresponding JASP data types, some detail about the variables themselves, and also the examples of each of these variables. So ratio again are defined usually as having an absolute 0 and being equidistant values from that absolute 0. It also means that the ratio of two particular values has a meaning. So for instance, if we have an adult who is 2 meters tall and an infant who is 1 meter tall, then we can say that the adult is twice as tall as the infant, and so that ratio makes sense. This is obviously labeled as a scale variable, and also in that category is the interval variable as well, or the interval type. Again, we have equal distances here between the numerical values, but they may not necessarily have an absolute 0. A good example being shoe size. It also doesn't make sense to have a ratio here. So if I take size 10 and somebody else takes size 5 in UK shoe sizes, then my feet are not twice as big as that other person's. Because of the equidistance between the values, these are both put into the scale category in JASP and a lot of other programs such as SPSS. Then we have the two categorical variables, which are nominal and ordinal, the difference being that the ordinals have a very specific order. So for instance, exercise level could be rated as low, moderate and high, or a grade from an assessment could be A, B, C, D or E, and so there is a natural order to those. This is also useful for things like Likert scale variables, where you might go from strongly agree to strongly disagree in a number of different stages. If there isn't any natural order, so for instance something like gender or program of study, then you would use something like a nominal variable. And so all of these three options are the ones that you will see in JASP. So going back to JASP again, we can see we have these options here, and we also have a lot of other information that we can specify in terms of that variable. The one we'll look at in a few seconds will be this one here, which gives you the ability to compute a variable from a particular variable that we've already got in the data set. This can either be done using R code, which is the underlying code of JASP, or computing it with a drag and drop interface, which we'll look at shortly. So once we have the variable specified there, we can close that window, and now it's a very simple matter to put data in. So I'll just put in some values in here very quickly. Like so. Again, if we want to add additional variables, we just click on the plus button, and by doing that you can see we get back to the appropriate menu that we've just had. Again, I'm now going to calculate a specific new variable from my height variable, and what I'm going to do is to convert height into what we call a z-score. If you're not familiar with the z-score, then that means that the value of height will be represented as a function of the mean and the standard deviation of the computed variable here. So the mean would be specified as 0, and a z-score of 1 would mean you're one standard deviation above that mean, and a z-score of -1 would be one standard deviation below that mean. So to do that, I'm just going to first of all give it a label again, and I'm going to give it the label height z, and again by doing reply it will, or return, sorry, it will then take me to the next category, and again I'm just going to change the long name height as z-score. Now what I'm going to do is, again, this will be a scale variable, but this time I'm going to compute this using a drag and drop interface. When I do, you can see that it immediately opens up this work area, which consists of some basic functionality here and any of the variables I've already got within my data set, plus some more detailed variables in this list down here, which are fairly substantial. If you notice, there is one that is the z-score variable, and to use that I can just click on it and you can see that this function comes into the work area, and then it's waiting for a value to go into there, so I'll actually click on height and that will move that into the values area, and that will essentially put the z-scores for the height variable into this column. To do that, I click on compute column and you can see that the z-scores are now computed and placed into that column. Note, you can see that this 200 centimeter person is 1.418 standard deviations above the mean, and this 145 centimeter height person is minus 1.61 above the mean there, or below the mean, sorry. So once we've done that, again, we can close down that area here. You notice that in the headings it is indicated that this is a calculated variable rather than just a simple inputted variable. We can also add another one, so I'm going to add a grouping variable. So I'm going to use gender, and I'm just going to say how it's going to be represented using M and F. Again, it's not a computed variable, but what it is a nominal variable. So again, once I've done that, it's easiest just to close down the window there and put the data in. Again, I can say apply, and in here I'll put down either M or F as I go through to indicate whether or not I've got a male or a female. And now I have my data in that particular column. Again, at any point we can double click on this header and we'll get back to our information screen. Notice now that we've got a very specific nominal variable, it has given values for that variable and also the particular label associated with it. So for instance, I could change the value to be a numerical value and let's just leave the label as F and M. So for instance, I could, for example, specify 1 for female and 0 for male, which might be a typical thing you can do, and you can see that it's automatically ordered them for you, but you can change that order if you so wish. Notice also in the column it has got both the label and also the corresponding value, so that's quite a useful function of JASP. You don't have to keep looking up, especially if you've got several levels within your particular variable, about which corresponds to which number. Very useful for something like Likert scale variables to know which way you've coded them. You notice also that we do have a filter option here. So by clicking on the individual ticks and changing them to a cross, we can actually filter out some of our data before we actually start the analysis. So for instance, by clicking on this arrow here, I can filter out the females, and you can see that they've been grayed out and we've only been left with the males. Now at this point I should point out a known bug in JASP, or it's not so much a bug as a feature request, which may be coming in later versions. If I toggle this filter option, take a look at the value of the z-scores for height. Now, if we totally remove those female values, then you would expect the z-scores to change because the mean and the standard deviation of the data that was left would change. But if you notice, it doesn't. Now, this is quite important because if you're thinking about looking at individual categories within your data set, you are advised not to use these filters if you're using standardized scores, for instance, or calculated values, because they won't change from what was originally specified with the full data set. So do be very aware of that. If you move across to another column, I'll just put that back on. You can also look at filters for numerical values as well. So again, if we go to height, you can see that you can, because they're individual values, filter them out if necessary. But you can also filter by other means, so for instance by using some sort of function. So in this particular case, I'm going to have a look at filtering out something based on height. So if the height is less than, and I can click in here, 170, I'm going to filter that out. And so again, you can apply this pass-through filter by clicking on this button here. Notice then that anything that I've selected below 170 is now become available, and anything above that is not selected any further. So again, this is a useful way of filtering out or manipulating your data before you even get to the analysis stage. So again, you have a variety of simple functions and also a large number of additional functions as well, which can be used for this filtering process. Again, once you've done that, you can close that down, and you notice also here you have got the function here and you've got the filtering value here. And again, as we said previously, this filter, which you can remove by just double clicking on the bin icon here, will not be affected in terms of the calculated values. So if you notice there that those calculated values did not change even with the filter in place. So that's a basic overview of getting the data into JASP and also doing some basic filtering and manipulation prior to analysis. So hope you found that useful.